I didn't want to look like a complete asshole, so like I googled a little bit more about Joyce, just so that I wouldn't be like a complete jackass. But like it's not much.
It's interesting that there's this vibe of like, I'm talking about James Joyce, I have to know what I'm talking about, I have to Google it, like, it's
Yeah.
like, no. So I think that is already an interesting note to start on.
Okay, that's good. That's good. This is good.
Is the most memorable conversation that you've had about Joyce?
So I was like racking my brain trying to like
Yeah.
remember stuff like over the however many years that we've been talking about it back and forth and you starting to study everything. And I think I think it was actually when we were in high school, I think, like when you were
Okay.
like when you were reading it for like the first time, or like it was like one of the first times. And I can remember I think we're actually like at your house and we were upstairs and you were showing me like stuff in Ulysses and you were just so aghast because like there was like this clip or there was like this part of Ulysses where I think it was Bloom, like he was being like it was one of the first times I think that he was being talked about. And it was like it was something with food and it was like really gross and it was very like intense imagery. And I don't know why I remember that, but that was like yeah, it was I remember something of that.
I love
Yeah.
that.
It was
Okay.
something with food and it was like different kinds of like meats. like parts. And like yeah, I remember that because you were upstairs, I think, in your house when we did that. So
That's
yeah.
amazing. I love that that's your. And so is that like the your like first memory of Joyce is like he's the guy who writes about meat in a really gross way?
No, I think I think probably like one of the first like memories of Joyce was because like I had no idea who he was before. Like the only reason that I know him is because of you and like through you. And I think when you were starting to like get into it and like you were starting to read Ulysses for the first time, and like the overwhelming like mood when you were first reading it was just like, oh my God, like this guy, like who, like this man, like because like it was such a big book and it was so intense to read, and you're just like, wow, okay. And I think that was like the first little smidgen, yeah, that I can remember.
Amazing. Okay, so then to you, oh well, we'll start with this. Like, have you read any of Joyce's work?
Uh, I remember at Bloomsday, which was what, it was a year ago or 2 years ago, we read
Mm-hmm.
like we like all like went in a circle and like some of us did, some of us didn't. And I read out loud like a part of Ulysses that I don't quite remember. But no, I haven't read any of his other stuff.
Tell me more about like that event when we were reading it around. What was your experience there? What did we do?
It was really fun. We went to, I forget the name of the pub. Was it O'Donnell's? No, it wasn't O'Donnell's. It
Thing
was an
on White
Irish
Ave.
pub.
Yeah.
It was an Irish pub on White Ave, and we all like dressed up in like that sort of clothing style. I don't even know like what it would be called, but it was really fun. I wore your suit. Like your little fancy, it was really good. It was really, really fun. And I feel like the gang that we had, there was like me, there was like Josh, and there was like a whole bunch of like U of A humans. Like I feel like we were all there because of Joyce and because of you, because you're so passionate about it. And like it all brought us together. It was really fun. I feel like as I was reading that part of Joyce and like overall, like I have never read Ulysses and I don't really have a like a very in-depth understanding of his work and of James Joyce as an author. I mean, like I've always listened to what you have to say and all that kind of stuff, but it's not where my passions lie, so it's kind of hard to like remember a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really, really fun. And I feel like I don't know, I remember I read a part of it and it was something I remember the name Molly. I think I read something about Molly,
Mm-hmm.
or it was like lovey-dovey, I think, towards the very end. And like it was really cute.
Who is James Joyce and what did he do?
So he's an author and he wrote Ulysses, which is pretty cool. A lot of his stuff revolves around Ireland and Irish folks because he is Irish, I believe. Is he? Nice. And I feel like from what you've shared and like what I think even Sue, like our English teacher, like back in the day kind of shared is like either readers either like really, really love Joyce or like are just not fans at all. And like really it's just kind of indifferent because I feel like his work is very like either you love it or you hate it. Like you're really, really interested or you're kind of indifferent. I feel like that's kind of like the vibe that I've like kind of seen or kind of heard, I guess, like over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I know that like from what you've shared, like what I've kind of understood about Ulysses is like his work is very detailed, I think, is like
Okay.
what I would like how I picture it and like how I think of it. Like whenever you share stuff about Ulysses or James Joyce, like it's very technical reading, if that makes sense. Like it's not like some kind of like super cool, like compared to like The Great Gatsby or like something like that, where it's just like, ah, this is fun to read. Like Ulysses, like there's like a purpose behind it, I think, is kind of what like I've kind of sussed over the last bit. So
Okay. Interesting. And then, so to follow
yeah,
up on that, and like, what is Ulysses to you?
it's a big book. It is a very, very large novel. I know that it's set. I know that it's set in Dublin. I know that
Okay.
much, and um, I know that the main like protagonist human, his last name is Bloom. I never remember his first name, but I know that it's set in Dublin. Um, and I know that like Molly, I think she's like a love interest or like some sort of relationship with that lady. But that's really all that I know about Ulysses is that it's about this dude in Dublin, last name Bloom, and he's just kind of doing his thing. Um, yeah.
I love that. No, that's a very good answer. That's
Oh, and there's
interesting.
something about I don't know if this is part of Ulysses, but something with like the Dubliners. I don't know if that fits into Ulysses or like something else with that character. Because like I can remember you sharing stuff with me about that before, but I don't quite remember how it fits in.
Nice. Yeah. So I don't know. I found in these so far, a lot of people do immediately jump to Ulysses. And like, to be fair, that's what my work centers on. So maybe I've biased people, but yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. He wrote other stuff other than Ulysses. And Dubliners is one of his earlier works. It's a collection of short stories.
Oh,
Um,
isn't it like okay, now that I'm remembering stuff, like is it about like political unrest in Ireland or like is like so it's like not political unrest, but like it's like it says like social commentary like on society. Like I don't quite remember and I've never read it. So
that's
yeah.
okay. That's
It
interesting.
has it revolves
And
around humans.
it does. Yeah, that's interesting. And I find it interesting because I know for a fact in high school English class that we read Evelyn, which is from Dubliners as well. That's okay. Then interesting that it didn't stand out to you because for a lot of people that's like that was a lot of times when they were like translating Joyce, that'd be like the first one that they translated because it's like so Joycean, you know what I mean? And some people would, yeah. But anyway, so it's interesting to me that it didn't stand out to you a ton.
Is that Scott Fitzgerald, was this like the story with like James Joyce in like the window, or was that someone else? Like that was a different author that I'm thinking of. Like that crazy story where like this guy was like gonna like jump out a window or something for like his love for the. Do you remember this? It's like this one author was like so obsessed with another author that when he finally got to me,
Fitzgerald, he offered to throw himself out the window of Shakespeare Company to honor Joyce. And James was like, no,
I do remember.
that's such a
That's
good
a
story.
that's a classic. Maybe that's why I linked like The Great Gatsby with Joyce because I'm like deep down that memory was lurking. That's Scott. Excellent, excellent.
I love it. That is such a good story. Okay, I was gonna make this thing about like form and be like, oh, like you compared it to Scott Fitzgerald or like The Great Gatsby, so it must be a novel. But instead, I think it's interesting that it's, tied to the stories that we know about Joyce that don't necessarily have to do with his work so much. Has there been any moment or event that changed your understanding of Joyce?
I feel like this was what, oh my goodness, this is probably at like this was before the pandemic when you were planning to go to Ireland for Bloomsday. And like you were explaining to me like the magnitude of like this event, like in going to Ireland, like going to Dublin. And like I feel like I had known like I mean all like tons of great authors like throughout history, like everyone like they have devoted scholars to that author and like they're celebrated and they're treasured and they're adored. But I feel like when you started to share that with me, that there was like these like massive events like devoted to Joyce, like in that canon of like June 16th, like Bloomsday, like and tied into the novel itself, like not even just like Joyce as like a human, but like in like throughout his work, I was like, whoa, like I knew that he was famous and like I knew that his works were like a big deal, but that kind of like, yeah, it just kind of like took me like a step back and I was like, this is a really big deal. And I think also when you were talking about like when you like it's like is it like the James Joyce like society or like it's like a collection of scholars like around the world and like the fact that there's so few like scholars like that are purely dedicated to James Joyce like from what you've shared, that's like it's just really interesting that like the following is really really huge but like the specialists and like the expertise like on his work is a lot harder to find, which I think is kind of cool. So.
Yeah, that is true. So then would you like in your mind then does Joyce sort of more belong to like his fans as opposed to his scholars, where he almost exists more in these like fun events where we're walking around Dublin rather than he exists in like the academic articles that we write?
Oh, I feel like it would have to be a mix of both. And I feel like the celebration of Joyce, like as an author, is driven by like that academic community because like being passionate about something and like and dedicating your studies to an author, just like really anything, obviously that drives like an outward passion to share that with others and to celebrate it. So I think they definitely like go like hand in hand. I think. I mean, there's probably like hardcore Joyce fans that are just like James Joyce, and like they maybe haven't studied it at a university level. Like, there's definitely some of those folks out there.
Mhm.
But like, I definitely feel like the academic and like the scholar side definitely like drives like the look at Joyce, like he's so cool. Well, I wonder, like, considering that, like, all like a lot of his work, to my knowledge, I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong. Is like based in Ireland and like about Ireland in general. How does like the Irish people think of Joyce? Like, does Ireland consider him like a hero, or like are they really proud of his work? Like, you know how like some Canadian authors are like Canadian artists like Gordon Lightfoot that sings about Canadian history. We're just like, yeah, like does he have like that kind of like nationalist like following like in Ireland, or are they just like Joyce, like not good? Like that's kind of like
Yeah.
I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think that that is a really interesting question and one that academics are actually kind of dealing with right now. Um,
Really?
yeah, I think it's quite a recent thing to sort of question because like Joyce felt himself to be like a voluntary exile out of Ireland where he was like, no, I can't do my art in Ireland sort of thing. So it's on the one hand, you have him running away, but also all of his stuff takes place in Dublin. So it's like sort of this question of what's going on. And I think it's been a very recent question of like, well, then what makes an Irish novel? And can we consider Ulysses an Irish novel? And the interesting thing is, like, Ulysses came out in 1922, which
Yes.
is like the same year that Ireland like became a country again, like when it was no longer.
Oh,
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people, myself included, when they go into it, are sort of expecting it to be a part of like there were big like the Irish literary revival and that sort of thing with people like W.B. Yeats and like Jan Singh. They were like writing for like Irish nationalism. And so I think when a lot of people approach Joyce, they're expecting that same vibe. And it's really not. Like, I don't think he was like, yeah, it's okay to be a British colony, whatever. But also, he wasn't
yeah.
like pushing for nationalism. And I think he also had like, you know, like showed the nuances and critiques of like the negative sides of that nationalism. So I think
Yeah.
he's definitely recognized like as, you know what I mean, like as an Irish author. And obviously with things like Bloomsday existing, you know, it I don't think that Ireland's like, yuck, get that guy away from us. But I think it's, you know, I think when you have an author that was like, oh, I want to write about Ireland, but yuck, like I have to leave
Mhm.
that swamp of a country in order to write about it, it does become this sort of tense situation where, you know, how much can
That's
he really
so,
be? Mm-hmm.
so Joyce, he didn't actually like Ireland.
No, it's well, it's such a,
Or was he
it's
just like hardcore like commentary on it? Like it was more just like his critiques like throughout, like I'm guessing he was like born and raised there. Or was he just kind of like bleh?
yeah, I don't, I mean, so he was like born and raised. Then I think he went to Paris when he was 18 teenish vibes, got the whole like, oh man, I want to be like continental European. And I think at the time, like a lot of Irish nationalism was sort of a push to like rediscover the culture as it was before like colonization. And Joyce was more a big fan of like Europeanizing Ireland, and like, yeah, it should like find its place in the 20th century Europe. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so he very much so like he left with his, she wasn't his wife yet, but left with Nora, who eventually became his wife in 1904, and visited a couple times, but apart from that, really was like did not want to go back there, complained about it a lot. But it's interesting too, like he would keep up with it, and like as his like brother and his aunts and stuff who were still living in Dublin, he'd ask them like, you know, like very detailed, like about like the theater productions and stuff that were going on, you know. So it's this very weird ambivalent situation that he had, and that I think continues on, of sort of like, to study Joyce you need to know Irish history, you need to like have an understanding of Irish nationalism, but at the same time he was very like critical, and I think did not like
that's
it.
not what I would have thought at all.
Okay.
And now that you said the name Yates, I remember him. I remember you showing me his stuff. I think we were actually like sitting on my front porch, like back in the summer one year, and you're just like, look at it. No, I think maybe I was reading a text from you on my front porch. Either way, I remember his stuff because he was the one that was really like going for it. And wasn't he murdered? He was like,
oh, you're thinking of Francis Sheehy-Skeffington.
Skeffington, yes, that's the one. Yes.
Yeah. Also in Joyce's circle. Yeah. I don't know. Quite interesting. And I think it's interesting too, because I think both of them were like critical of the Catholic Church and critical of Irish nationalism. But they did it in very different ways, where Joyce was sort of like, I'm out of here, my art is, you know, needs to take place not in Ireland, and so I'm leaving. Whereas Skeffy, you know, tried to stay and do his best and got murdered for it. So maybe that's the Joyce. Did not.
I thought that Joyce was very much like Ireland, woo, and I guess that thought, like that assumption, I guess, from me just like overhearing bits and bobs like over the years, that was very wrong. Well, more or less, I guess, like, yeah.
No, but it's interesting. And I think like other people that I've talked to who have like read Ulysses said that they very much went into it expecting it to be like in the cause of Irish nationalism. So I don't know. I think there's something to be said about how like the Academy is sort of dipping its toe into the idea of like, maybe it's an Irish novel. Meanwhile, like the assumptions about Joyce and the common understanding of him seems to be, I don't know, like, you know, we're just like, oh, well, yeah, he's Irish, it must be an Irish novel.
And like, I feel like another thing is like, as soon as like someone is kind of like immortalized, like through history of like a piece of work that they've done, and it's attached to like their country of origin, like saying, like thinking of someone as like a Canadian writer or like a Canadian musician, as soon as you kind of get that in your mind that they've been like immortalized and like they've been like they're famous for a reason, but you kind of like, as soon as James Joyce, an Irish author, it kind of like, at least in my opinion, it kind of like sticks into my brain like, oh, they're saying he's an Irish author, like he's been celebrated for many years, his work must be inherently positive towards his home country because he's being celebrated as an Irish author. So like it kind of like puts that like little nugget in your brain that like, oh, if he's being celebrated as an Irish author, that must mean he has some nice stuff to say about Ireland. And like kind of same way with like anything, I guess, it's like tied to a country. Like I feel like that's where I got the impression that like Joyce is like pretty like vibing with Ireland, and like he was like doing good stuff and saying nice things, but I guess it was very much like criticisms and critiques. I don't know. That's just, I guess, how my brain kind of like thinks of it.
No, that's interesting. That's, I don't know.
It's like when you think of it like in like a Canadian context, like if I told you, oh, like if you had no idea who the Tragically Hip were, and I said, hey, Gord Downie is a Canadian singer-songwriter, you'd be like, this guy's the bomb. Like you probably wouldn't like the first thought in your brain probably wouldn't be like, oh, did he say bad things about Canada? You're probably like, oh, like he's a Canadian singer-songwriter. Like he's probably good stuff. So I feel like it's just like that inherent like positive kind of little nugget that gets put in your brain when it's like tied to like a country's interests, I guess. I don't know.
The public humanities kind of recognize like the study of humanities, which includes literature, as like full of this potential to bridge academic work and sort of like how we use that to like shape the world beyond the academy. Because, and I think that this is a great tie to what you were saying about, how like academic rigor and expertise drives like the fandom, like the fandom and the care of like for texts sort of thing, if that makes sense. So so the idea for this project is it has a fancy academic term. Ironically, the fancy academic term is vernacular criticism, where you just go and see what people who don't study it think. And I think that that's important to take into account. And then it's just going to be public on YouTube for if other people like being a part of Joyce conversations just for funsies. Is there anything that will be memorable or stick out for you in this conversation? And was there anything that was frustrating or exciting or new?
I mean, I learned a lot more about Joyce, like some good fun facts, and like I feel like the notion and like the perspective of like who I thought Joyce was and like what his work was kind of about, like completely shifted from what I originally thought. Like I thought that he was positive about Ireland and it was like all that good stuff, but the fact that like I'm actually quite shocked. Like I didn't know that he like left Ireland to like write about it. Like that's probably going to stick out for me, considering that like the rest of like the Irish like people that were like standing up for their country were like on the like they were getting murdered, and then he was just like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm just gonna go write a book. See ya. Obviously, it turned into like one of the most famous novels ever written. But like, it's very interesting. It's very polarized to what I originally thought.